All right, we are 1 minute in. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Illinois Green Alliance webinar, Net Zero Case Study, DuPage Wildlife Conservation Center. My name is Miranda Wright. I am the Education Engagement Manager here at Illinois Green. I'll be going through some quick logistics, an overview of Illinois Green, and then pass this over to our wonderful speakers today. You have all been muted upon entry, so please type any questions you have into the Q&A function at the bottom, and we'll get them answered at the end. This webinar is also being recorded and will be sent out in a follow-up email. For those who are unfamiliar, Illinois Green Alliance is a membership-driven nonprofit organization that advances green buildings and sustainable communities for all. Our 5-year strategic plan pushes the green building industry to meet or get on the path to net zero. We achieve this work through educational events such as this panel or tomorrow's building tour, by engaging communities and partnering with organizations across Illinois, and by advocating for new policies and legislation. Members can view our recorded webinars on our on-demand webinar library, and you can learn more about membership, upcoming events, and more at our website. I also want to take a quick moment to recognize Illinois Green Alliance's sustaining sponsors who make our work possible. A special thank you to our gold level sponsors, ComEd, USGBC, and Sloan. Make a commitment to advancing green buildings in communities across the state. Start a conversation about sponsorship today. And now I'd like to present our presenters. Today, we'll hear from Megan Zach, Chief Sustainability Officer at White & Company. Megan is an industry champion for sustainable design and minimizing the environmental impact of the built environment. Megan strives to demystify the sustainability process and help clients realize their goals and reach beyond zero to a net positive future. Her role at White is to champion buildings with zero carbon and energy while at the same time maximizing wellness. We also have Brittany Brophy, designer at White & Company. Brittany has over 9 years of experience in an active workplace environment. She began her journey in architecture at Ball State University and continued her education at IIT, where she enjoyed connecting with the city's extensive history of design. At White, she participates in a wide range of project types and roles to diversify her experience. And lastly, we have George Gardner, Senior Project Manager at White Construction Services. With 26 years of experience in the construction industry, he has served in previous roles ranging from carpenter to superintendent to project manager. He has a specialized focus on projects within the parks and recreation industry with a considerable experience in ice rink construction. Known for his logical and organized approach, George is always on the lookout for more efficient ways to complete projects. And now I will pass it over to Brittany. I will stop sharing so she can share her deck.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my video on. There we go. All right, I'm in action. Thank you. Sorry for the delay. Well, I will go ahead and get started. DuPage Wildlife Conservation Center, located in Glen Ellen, Illinois, is a 27,000 square foot new wildlife rehabilitation clinic and visitor center. Project started over 10 years ago as a master plan for the DuPage County Forest Preserve. The wildlife clinic and facilities were seen as essential investments to the overall mission of the Forest Preserve, a mission to protect and educate the public about Illinois' native ecosystem. As a rehabilitation center, visitors can bring injured or orphaned native wildlife to the clinic for treatment. Once recovered, they are released back into the wild. It also offers interactive educational exhibits and an interpretive trail with wildlife observation areas. Here's a video of a typical patient. I see the volume's not working. So Stephanie here is sharing some owls that had fallen out of a nest and are now orphaned. And so you can see they are now new patients at the facility, and they'll help them grow up until they're old enough to be back and released back into the wild. Okay. The clinic building is part of a larger site of buildings, all part of the wildlife campus. The surrounding structures include exterior mammal, bird, and reptile recovery housing, all based on a prey-predator organization. The walking trail, known as the Back 40, has enhanced wetlands and native plants that are appropriate for the ecosystem. The design concept is based on 3 organizational strategies. The first is looking at dividing the public and private spaces for animal and human use. The second is site orientation and optimizing renewable resources like solar and geothermal with an effort to preserve as many existing trees as possible. Lastly, creating a welcoming atmosphere for visitors while displaying the objective behind the clinic. Since the project's still under construction, we will share with you our vision of the wildlife clinic. Much consideration went into the selection of the exterior facade materials. We designed a building envelope with consideration for each material's embodied carbon footprint, durability, and color palette to blend into the natural landscape. There's a variety of textures, earth tones to the facade, as well as 2 different entry points, one for visitors and then one for animal rehab. Materials seen here are fiber cement panels, composite metal panels, timber beams, and tongue and groove wood decking. Like the buildings in the images shown, cough cough, bird killers, we selected materials like bird-friendly glazing and perforated metal panels to help reduce the impact buildings have on native bird species. In this view, you can see the 2 methods of preventing bird strikes by reducing the reflective and transparent qualities to the glazing. By using a 2-inch by 4-inch spacing to the pattern, you can reduce the impact for larger species, and a 2-inch by 2-inch for smaller species like hummingbirds. The client wanted to use native Illinois tree leaves as inspiration for the educational purposes. We used these images and created a dot pixelated graphic based on the shape, the capillary veining, and shadow of the leaves. We placed these custom leaf patterns on all the main entry points for high impact. For typical punch windows, we use more of a standard scattered rain pattern, all within that 2 by 2 spacing. The patterns are to be implemented during the fabrication of the glass using a translucent cement front on the number 1 surface. Now look at the floor plan. Most of the program is located on the first floor, with the exhibit in yellow towards the front, clinic orange, more of the central core space, and the rehab in green around the perimeter to maximize daylight. Working with the client, everything needed to be as compact for circulating efficiency. Much like a human hospital, animals come through the emergency intake and are sent to triage for observation. Then on to the lab for x-rays or surgery. And once completed, they go to ICU for recovery, and then on to rehab, and eventually are placed to the exterior housing structures, then released. The second floor is more of a human-based working space, with an effort to keep the staff separated from the busy animal spaces below. The interior finishes are inspired by the life cycle of a sugar maple leaf. Many of the materials are drawn from the leaf's seasonal color palette, much seen in the exterior renderings. The client was interested in a warm, welcoming look and less industrial. A huge element in creating that atmosphere of the exhibit space is the timber beams and wood decking. You can see the level of coordination effort it takes to organize the fire sprinklers, electrical, and mechanical components. We strategically placed the majority of mechanical ducts inside the south wall, left here, to avoid cluttering the structure. We used hidden or concealed connections at the beam's cross sections where the roof overhangs in two directions. Our structural engineer would often say, there's no such thing as a moment connection with wood. So to reinforce this, we use a hybrid of steel columns and beams to support the wood beam cantilevers. Another important factor, the forest preserve was maintenance of the wood. We used a log oil finish as well as a bee repellent that transitions at the building envelope. You can see the color difference in the image on the left between the interior and exterior wood. We worked with an exhibit designer to enhance the visitor experience. You can see a few elements here, educating the public on ways to preserve the natural environment. The exhibit will also have windows peeking into the clinic spaces, showing activities like exam, surgery, or a visitor favorite, the baby animal rehab. And just to circle back, on the final step in the animal recovery is the outdoor enclosures. The images give you a sense of the types of construction utilized for the different species. The one on the left is the carnivore exhibit. So think foxes, coyotes, and on the right is the raptor flight barn. So owls or hawks. Both structures allow water and light to filter through, giving the occupants a sense of the exterior environment while preventing them from additional injuries.
Thanks, Brittany. I had the same issue trying to get my camera on. So shifting gears, I want to give you a little bit of background on our sustainable focus, energy reduction and designing for wildlife. So let me go to the next slide. Okay, so very early on, we had a really amazing client who came to us, and one of his early requests was to incorporate solar. We were like, no problem, we can absolutely do solar. This is the president of the DuPage County Forest Preserve Board, and he had previously put solar panels on the existing building, and he put them on his home. So he knew the payback and the importance of incorporating that early into the project. So at our first charrette that we did with the community, we talked about adding solar. We also got a lot of feedback about all of the other sustainability elements that people are excited about in the forest preserve. And we clumped that into these 4 sustainable priority buckets: human, social, environment, and economic. So obviously this is an animal hospital recovery center. The goal is for these animals to be released back into the wild. So health is a very important element. We're also trying to educate people. We want to make sure everyone from the community can participate and be part of this space. Obviously, environment is a huge element. The building, as Brittany mentioned, is set into the forest preserve. And the idea is for it to blend into the forest preserve and not stand out. And so really making sure that we're thinking about the way water and air moves around and through the building, and obviously protecting the animals from the building as well, since we're there to rehab animals that have been hurt from human interference, really. And then the economics. So like I said, our client was motivated by the economics of having solar. This type of project gets funded by grants and people donating money, but they don't necessarily have a huge budget to run this type of facility for years to come. And so having that net zero was a very important element to making sure this moved forward. So on the screen is a list of sustainable features. Brittany touched a lot on that bird-friendly glass element, so I'll skip past that one. Another big and very important piece was the native and drought-tolerant plants and the BMPs for storm water. Right behind this building, there's a creek that goes through this site. And like I said, we're sort of tucked up against that forest preserve. And so making sure that this building is just part of the forest preserve and not something that's really added to that space was very important. Items that are highlighted in yellow, those are all the things that helped get us all the way to net zero. And I'll kind of dig into each of these as we go through this presentation. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, a net zero, the definition of a net zero building is a building that makes as much energy as it consumes within a calendar year. And we are getting a grant for this project, so we will be going through the verification period and proving that we in fact are a net zero building. So I just wanted to quickly show the Illinois net zero honor roll, just to give a little bit of background on White & Company. So the top 3 buildings on the honor roll are White & Company designed projects. The 4th one, which is kind of a dark red color, that was designed by a different architect, but it was built by White Construction Services. So going into this project, we have a lot of lessons learned in our back pocket on how to get to net zero. But that doesn't mean this was a smooth process. There were still additional lessons that we learned, and there were still important key takeaways that I want to share with you today. But the exciting thing is that there are, I think, 12 on this list, and then there's another 8 that are in design and or construction on the watch list right now. So it's very exciting to see Illinois get so many net zero projects. Okay, when you design a net zero building, step 1 is to reduce energy. So like I said, all of the energy you use has to be offset by solar or some other type of renewable energy. And so the more energy you use, the more solar panels you need, and they're expensive. So number 1, we tried to make a very tight building enclosure. 2 of our previous net zero projects were designed to a passive house standard. If you can do that, you are further ahead of all of your other net zero friends. Unfortunately, this building didn't get to passive house level, but we still took into account a lot of those elements that you would use in a passive house, a FIAS design building. We then optimized the glazing. So you can see in this image on the right, we have a very deep footprint for our building, which obviously helped us, but we still tried to minimize the glass and really put it where we knew people would be working or visitors would be, and really optimizing those locations. And then we looked at using a high performance mechanical system. We did a geothermal system and a water source heat pump. And then, of course, we have to look at the impact of the people. So this building is run by some staff, but then there's a lot of volunteers who come in and help with the animals. So there's going to be a huge educational component that happens as the building opens. So just to touch on the envelope, these are all of the strategies for a high-performing building envelope. Honestly, we should be doing this on every project, net zero or not. But just to touch on a few, that continuous air barrier and insulation, super important. I'll talk a little bit about our energy modeler, but he's always telling me that if we can get the envelope tighter, that's going to save so much energy. It's the most important piece of that envelope. And then, of course, we used high-performing glass and thermally improved windows. We used a rain screen here, and that helps with the water and the drying time. And then we've hired a third party to do a blower door test, again, making that envelope tight and then making sure it's actually installed the way it's designed is very important. And we're lucky to be working with our own construction team. So we had all of these conversations very early on. And then, of course, getting that third party envelope commissioning agent on board sooner the better. That is definitely a lesson we learned on previous projects. So the chart on the right, that is the chart that our energy modeler put together during SD. So this is very early on. We started with, of course, code minimum system. And then as you move to the right, you can see the chart getting better. So that first jump, which was almost a 20% improvement, was going to the water source heat pump. And then we improved another 20% by going to geothermal. So we jumped almost a 40% improvement just with our mechanical system. That's huge. And then all those little incremental changes, that was based on updates and improvements to the envelope. And then that last change, which is the next big jump, still smaller than the mechanical system, that is tightening that envelope and making sure we incorporate the blower door test to make sure it's installed properly. And that's where we got with our EUI. So like I said, absolutely making your building as energy efficient as possible is step one for net zero. On the left, there's a couple of bullet points. These are lessons learned on past projects. So making sure all mechanical systems speak to your building automated system. This is really important after construction while you're going through that net zero verification phase. Even if you don't have to verify the net zero process, knowing what all of the different mechanical systems in the building are doing is really important for your building maintenance staff so that they know if something goes wrong, they can get in there and fix it and they know where the problem's coming from right away. And then making sure that building automated system control language is programmable. So there are some companies that have a language that is proprietary and you can't fix it or change it. And that just makes it really difficult to control without having some sort of specialist come in and fix it. So making sure that control language is programmable is super important. And then I already mentioned this, but I'll say it again, getting your commissioning agent on board as soon as possible. They can help you with those first two bullet points, making sure you're asking the right questions and getting the right pieces and parts of your system. So as I mentioned, we installed a geothermal system here. The picture on the left is it actually being installed. It was an absolute muddy mess when they were installing it. They did well, not accidentally, but as they did the test well, they discovered that we were going right through an aquifer. So in the end, that ended up being very helpful. We were originally at 64 wells, and we ended up with 56. So we saved 8 wells, and that was mainly because we found out we were running through this aquifer. The wells are 450 feet deep. On the right, you can see a little diagram. Those cables go all the way down to the bottom, loop back up, and then they're grouted solid. One of the things our team did, we've been talking a lot about embodied carbon these days and making sure that the decisions we're making to save energy isn't affecting the amount of carbon that our buildings are using. So we ran an analysis to make sure that grouting these 450-foot deep tubes isn't more carbon intense than what we're saving in energy. And turns out it's not. So good news, geothermal is definitely worth it and highly recommended. So we did all of these things, and then we ran a solar analysis to see how many solar panels we need. Kind of as a rule of thumb that we learned from our first 3 net zero projects was that for about every square foot of internal space, you need about a square foot of solar panel. Not when it's a hospital. So we have an extremely intense use here. We have a lot of ventilation requirements. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's surgeries, so the lighting is high. There's warming pads in every single one of these recovery spaces. So it's a very, very energy intense space. So we ended up with about 3 times as many square feet of solar panels as we have space in the building, and that's after making it extremely efficient. So that main clinic and visitor center is completely covered in solar. We also have covered the Raptor flight barn. The images that Brittany showed of that is completely covered or will be in solar panels. And then we did a ground mount array. In this image, it looks like it's lifted up because we originally thought we were going to put parking underneath it. But the client decided they didn't need as much parking. So we put the solar panels right onto the ground. Believe it or not, that ground mount array is of these 3 different arrays, that's the one that is making the most amount of energy for us. Okay, so what were our challenges? I was going to get to this. So super intense energy use, like I mentioned, it's a hospital. So, you know, that verification period, we're going to have to very closely monitor all of the things that are happening to make sure that we're not using too much energy. We're located in the forest. So we had some really big trees that we wanted to save, and we did. George will tell you a little bit about that. But unfortunately, they were shading our building. And so making solar work in shade is not great. So that was definitely a challenge. This building was starting during COVID. And so I'm sure you guys all remember there were huge supply chain issues. We also had huge cost increase issues. So, you know, before COVID, things cost X, and then during COVID, that number just kept getting higher and higher. So that was definitely a challenge. Our client is relying on a ton of grants, and then they have a very limited budget based on the money that they've received. So that, of course, was a challenge. 3 and 4 together were a challenge. And then the grants also came with requirements. So one of the requirements was that we had to buy American products. And solar panels aren't really made in America. So we had to do a lot of legwork to make sure that that was okay. But then all of our other systems, we really needed to make sure were American made, which is fantastic and great for America, but it can be a challenge and a cost challenge as well. And then I already mentioned this, but the volunteers, as you're going through that verification process, it's really, really important that people are not doing things like propping a door open because it's kind of smelly, or not unplugging a piece of equipment when they leave the room. That human behavior element of net zero is super important. So like I said, there's going to have to be a big educational component of this. And then I just wanted to flash this up on screen. These are all of the grants, foundations, and individual gifts that our client went through to get the funding. So it was quite a heavy lift for the client, but also pretty amazing. And we got the full $2 million Illinois Clean Energy Community Foundation Net Zero grant. Obviously, you get some at the beginning, and then you have to prove that you're net zero over the course of a year, and then we'll get the rest of it. They also got a really large grant from Department of Energy. This is a program specifically for community buildings, but that was another $2 million. One thing you'll notice here is that we're not getting any funding through the Inflation Reduction Act. So unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because they got this giant grant from the Department of Energy, they are not eligible for any of the Inflation Reduction Act funding. But that's okay. They still did get the ComEd distributed generation rebate, which is for all of the solar. And they also got the energy efficiency program ComEd money. So lots of different funding sources, but ultimately they were able to make it work. So very exciting. And with that, I am going to turn it over to George.
Thanks, Megan. So this project was structured around guaranteed maximum price, which brings significant benefits. Not only does it ensure transparency with the open book approach, but more importantly, it encourages the entire team, so the owners, designers, construction managers, to all collaborate and discuss the project towards a common goal. It also helps align interest, and it drives the efficiency and the accountability throughout the project. One of the key challenges that we faced was maintaining full operation of the existing clinic throughout construction. The facility needed to remain open to allow the staff to continue treating patients. And to accommodate this, we had to divide the project up into 3 different phases. Phase A, shown here, involved constructing the animal enclosures on the northwestern half of the site. Phase B, which includes the new clinic and visitor center, is currently under construction, nearing completion. And then Phase C, set to begin next month, will involve the demo of the existing clinic and the addition of more enclosures. So this phased approach was necessary to make sure that the clinic's operation remained uninterrupted. Phase A started in October 2022 and was completed in spring of 23. Phase B began in August of last year and is scheduled to be completed fall of this year. And we're anticipating that we'll have a Phase C completion in early 2025. It's also important to point out that in our design-led, design-build approach, construction is integral long before the boots even hit the ground. So we're constantly collaborating with our architects, engineers, designers to address budget challenges, constructability issues, and that goes a long way towards aligning the team's goals and ensures a smoother project delivery. So this photo kind of captures some of the phasing challenges that we faced. You can see the existing clinic right in the center and surrounded by the construction. So we had to plan around many different things. We weren't able to interrupt the power. We had to make sure that the staff had a place to park. We had to make sure that the animal drop-off and access to the existing clinic were maintained at all times. And when Phase C begins, it'll actually take over the space currently occupied by the existing clinic. So here we've outlined different project delivery methods, but the design-led, design-build approach has been, in my opinion, particularly effective for this project. We have a tightly knit team. We have streamlined communication, and at least on my end, that always leads to faster decision-making, and also gives kind of a shared sense of responsibility. This method eliminates the typical finger pointing or financial finger pointing that often occurs between, your construction manager and your designer, or construction manager, architect, and also fosters a more collaborative atmosphere where we're all working towards the same goal. A benefit of this approach is the constant communication between the team. Design, engineering, construction teams, we're all working together as one cohesive unit. We're not fractured, we're not split apart. And this helps ensure that the project vision is maintained across every phase, and also results in a higher quality product where all the details are carefully coordinated to meet the project vision. Construction's early involvement in the design process allows us to engage more deeply with the project's goals, including the environmental goals. As an example, and through collaboration with the design team, the client, we're able to reduce the number of trees in multiple areas that were scheduled for removal. In one example, we were able to reroute a walking path to preserve a large oak tree that would have otherwise been removed by the straight walking path. So now it's kind of a curved path around the tree and adds a bit of character to the project as well. One of our biggest issues, and Megan had kind of touched on this, is the water management. It has been and remains a significant challenge on this project. Due to the topography, there's a large grade change at the location where the new clinic sits, and which by itself would be challenging enough. But when we were drilling the geothermal wells, we encountered an underground water seam about 350 feet below grade, and it was producing 100 gallons of water per minute for the additional drilling to get to the depth of 450 feet. And this is times 58 wells. So managing this excess water definitely required some creative solutions, and we had to store and divert what we calculated to be about 500,000 gallons on this project. Some of the responses to this, we implemented a series of prevention measures, including digging borrow pits for water storage, using silt bags to filter out sediments, and installing silt fences and rock check dams throughout the site. But there was no one solution of it. It was a constantly evolving solution. So instead, we had many iterations and layers of wastewater prevention measures that we had to implement during the drilling process. So as Megan had said, the building envelope is one of the most important components. And with any high performance envelope, attention to the detail is crucial. So in the design phase, the plans and the specs, that's your first line of defense. It sets the expectation, but the execution on the site is the other half of the equation. Part of our role is to enforce these details, and we're constantly monitoring contractors' work to ensure that they use the approved materials that they had submitted on site, but also following the specifications to the detail. And that oversight's critical in achieving the long-term performance that is expected of the design. Sustainability is at the heart of this project. We've met with and worked closely with our waste recycler to optimize how materials are sorted and disposed of on site. So not only does that keep their operation efficient, but it helps us to minimize the environmental impact that's often seen with traditional construction. Coordination for this project has been essential. We're literally building around an active facility, and it's not just an office building, it's an animal clinic. So some of the animals, which they call patients, they're extremely sensitive to noise. Some are sensitive to dust, some even sensitive to human presence. So to mitigate these, we've had to implement dust screening, water spraying, staggered construction, different construction times. We've utilized temporary entrances to divert the traffic. I'd say, though, the most effective tool in our arsenal has been communication with the client. So we meet with the client and the facility staff every week to ensure that our activities are well communicated, well understood. So we're not just looking at this through a construction lens, but we're receiving and understanding the feedback and getting it from their perspective. This project has been a unique blend of challenges and successes, from maintaining operations in sensitive environments to navigating all the unexpected site condition. We've approached every hurdle with a spirit of collaboration and innovation throughout this project, and the design-led, design-build approach allowed us to be agile, responsive, and committed to the project's goals and successes. I do speak for the entire team that we're proud of the work that we've accomplished so far, and we're really excited to see the project through to completion, knowing that it's going to provide a long-lasting benefit both to the community and the environment. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, White and Company speakers, and talking to us about this beautiful project. Also, before we get into the Q&A, which I want to plug, if you have any questions for our three great speakers, please put those into the Q&A function now. But we also, for those who aren't aware, we have a building tour tomorrow at this location at 10 a.m. Registration is still open. You can go to the Illinois Green website to find that information and sign up. There's still a few spots left. So if you're interested in coming to see it yourself, please do. But for now, if you want to stop sharing, Megan, we can jump into our Q&A. And you are also, welcome to put your video back on. So first question, if you found an aquifer when drilling your boreholes, how could you grout without pouring grout into the aquifer, essentially displacing its water?
So I'll take this. When it goes in there, it actually kind of dams up the water. So that actually helped us when we started that process.
Great. Is the newer part of the parking lot permeable paving? If yes, where is the excess water sent?
The existing parking lot is permeable paving. There is a new portion that will just be asphalt, but it's all graded to our off our BMP areas.
Great. I had a few questions myself that's not in the Q&A, if that's all right. Megan, at the beginning, you spoke about this project was not going for FIAS. And then I was surprised that you guys are doing the tight envelope, you're doing the blow door test. So I just wanted to see if you could speak to why that decision was made not to go for that certification.
And I don't know if before I jump in, Scott joined us here. So Scott unfortunately couldn't be here to speak, but he's here to help answer questions. He was on the team from the very start. He runs our Chicago office, and he was the architect that started this project with our client. So he might have some more insight into this. But, you know, I don't know exactly the reason, but when we started looking at all of the different elements of the envelope, having the amount of insulation that's required to meet Passive House, there's a cost associated with that. And so getting to net zero and getting all of the solar that we needed was prioritized over the last few things we would have had to do to get to that Passive House standard.
Understood. Scott, welcome. Hello. Do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
That's exactly it. With all of our sustainability, we always try to use the guidelines in the best way possible, and sometimes there's synergies between them. In this case, there were a lot of things going on. The client was determined to do the best they could. They have a limited budget, just like everybody, and so they picked and chose the best things for them. It is net zero. They did a lot of elements. We tried to do Passive House wherever we could, but those last final things are costly and sometimes didn't work with other synergies, and so it was determined that we weren't going to go for the full certification, but we did do the best we could in all levels.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both for your answers. Another question I had was there was some earlier talking about when designing such a tight envelope, making sure that when you have either workers at the building or volunteers at the building, that everyone is educated for what you're shooting for that occupancy and that energy use specifically. Are you, as the architects on the project, will you be helping all with that educating occupants post-occupancy? Or is that something the client will be taking on themselves?
So we'll definitely be giving guidelines and helping the client. But ultimately we won't be sticking around and attending. You know, they're going to be onboarding volunteers all the time. So we'll help with the language of how to onboard and the tips and tricks. But it'll ultimately be up to the client to actually educate everybody.
Some things happening in Did you apply for LEED?
Yes, so we are attempting LEED as well. I guess I didn't mention that presentation, but yes, the plan is to get LEED golds.
Fantastic. I'm not sure if you stated this in the presentation or not. Where is the location of the geothermal wells?
It essentially wraps the southern half of the building, so it's on the southwest, south, and southeast corners.
Were there any trade-offs of environmental trade-offs with that drilling of like having to take trees or anything just for the geothermal itself, or did you have a clean slate to work in?
I can't speak to the design of that.
I can speak to that. For the most part, the great majority of it is in land that was going to be touched by the project anyway. There's a heavy grade change here on the project. And so almost the great majority of the wells are in where the grade change needed to happen anyway. That led into a lot of the challenges that George was talking about because the steep grade change was challenging for water mitigation. But I think all but 2 wells were in areas that would have needed to be changed for the grading anyway. And also, I think that was discussed, but there was extensive work done to look at which trees were removed. There were trees removed for this project, but the great majority of them were under the standards of the forest preserve, would have been removed anyway. The trees were invasive or dead because of different reasons. And so the project was strategically placed to avoid trees that were deemed best and then remove trees that needed to be removed anyway because they weren't native to the area.
Fantastic. Well, that looks like that is all of our questions in the chat and the Q&A. Thank you for answering my questions as well. Thank you all for the presentation. Like I stated, we will be having a building tour at this location tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The link to the tour is in the chat. I also am going to be resharing my screen, if I can find it, for a feedback survey as well for participants to answer. We want to make the best education program possible for everyone. So the more feedback we get on how we're doing, the better our education will be. So thank you all attendees. Thank you presenters. Have a great day, and I'll see some of you tomorrow.